Hello, all my entrepreneurs and business leaders, and welcome to the Michael Esposito Show, where I interview titans of industry in order to inform, educate, and inspire you to be great. My guest today has overcome challenges such as ADD and dyslexia, all while taking on leadership roles in the corporate world, and at times, the only woman in the room. She is the founder of Productivity Tools and Insights, LLC. My friend and fellow Toastmaster, Carol Vince. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm so happy to have you on. It's pretty exciting. It's funny. We were just, as the show started up, we had Linda Grace Farley on the phone, and we were just kind of catching up as old friends do, right? And I do remember the very first time meeting you was in our Toastmasters meeting. I walked into the Boardman Library in Poughkeepsie, and you were sitting in your far corner, as you always sat, with all of your stack of binders and books and bags and everything. And I didn't make any assumptions or anything, but I saw you there, and I was just wondering, all right, what's this woman all about? And your beautiful blouses, as you're wearing today, a beautiful red blouse today. And I was just wondering, what's this woman all about? And we ended up finally speaking, and I don't remember if it was that day or the following time that we ended up speaking, and you told me you were an author, and I was just like, I got to know more about this woman. And soon enough, I heard many speeches of yours and learning more about your leadership and your roles in the corporate world at IBM and so many other places. And so when you filled out the form to be on the show, I was really excited to have you on and learn more about your journey.
Well, I'm glad to be able to join you on this.
Yeah.
It's a habit that I have of always sitting in the back of the room so I can observe the interaction of people. This way I can tell if somebody is struggling with the content, when in my corporate job, when we were presenting to customers, and if somebody was expressing an opinion that in facial motions that were in conflict with the information we were providing, I would make sure that the presenter would recognize them and have an opportunity to have a discussion. So that was always my habit.
Wow.
And I was generally, when I was coming to the Toastmasters meeting at noon, I was usually coming from or going to something which explained the materials that I was carrying with me.
I find that interesting because you and I share something in common. I was never diagnosed with ADD or ADHD, so that part I don't know. I do know that I multitask like a maniac, and I feel as though I'm not doing anything if I'm just doing one thing at once. Although my mindful living coach, Matt, would tell me that, there's some things there that we can certainly adjust. The one thing that I was diagnosed with at a young age was dyslexia, and you also sharing that with me. I wonder some of the similarities that you and I have. I also like sitting in the back of a room and observing everything from a distance, while I end up becoming the center of attention because I'm loud and sometimes obnoxious. I do tend to sit in the back of the room, and I wonder if that's a trait of ours.
I don't know.
Okay.
It was something that I developed during my corporate days because we did a lot of presentations. I managed teams that, as part of their jobs, was to work as presenters. One of the reasons that brought me to Poughkeepsie was to manage a group of chip designers, and they would be presenting to engineers who didn't necessarily affiliate with some of the IBM philosophies or design products that we had. So it was important that the presenters were connecting with the audiences. Or if they were very technical people presenting to business owners, then I had to make sure that it was converted into a language that a business person would understand.
Right.
And they would not get lost in the verbiage or the acronyms that were so common in the IT field.
So observing in order to then go back and make that connection and give the feedback that's necessary.
Yes.
Right.
Both to the presenters and to the audience.
Right.
So that we could close any gaps that may have inadvertently been created.
Right.
I've never associated it with my ADD because I lived for decades without knowing.
Right.
I knew I was somewhat different, but I was never able to put a label on it until probably 6 or 7 years ago.
Which is pretty amazing. I would love if you're comfortable enough to share your age or where you are today, just so that people can understand how long that journey took.
It was amazing. I mean, I am in my 70s. I still walk 18 holes of golf at least twice a week. So
and you still ski?
I haven't been skiing. I had an accident which injured my shoulder, so I have.
But up until then, you were skiing, right?
I was skiing.
That's
yes,
what I thought.
I'm an avid downhill skier. I'm a powder hound. If anybody knows anything about Alta, Utah, that's one of my regular stopovers in the season, hoping for 18 or 24 or 36 inches of powder.
Yeah,
because it is like nothing else in the world.
It's awesome
as a skier. And I was able to function in the world, but with some serious challenges, which is why I'm so vocal and verbal right now about it.
Yeah.
Because if you're not diagnosed, and about 30 years ago, the person I was living with sent me off to a therapist. And he said, you've been far too successful to even think about ADD as a diagnosis. Which, so I went home and said, okay, nothing wrong with me.
Right.
Closed the box and, didn't really think about it after that. Because here was a therapist and this was his job. And that's one of the myths of ADD and ADHD. And I talk about both. If you read now, everybody's talking about ADHD, but most women don't have the hypercharacteristic. Okay. So, and there's a colleague of mine who said, if you had been speaking about ADHD, I would say, that's not me. That's my brother. So it was good that I took the H out and spoke to the entire population of people who are attention deficit disorder and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And most women, but myself included, don't have the hyperactivity. And it was, in grammar school, when it was the little boys going, my turn, that got all the teachers' attention because they were disruptive. Women like myself sat quietly in our seats and were daydreaming. But because we weren't disruptive, we were ignored. Right. So I'm actually developing a card deck of 15 strengths and 15 struggles of ADD and ADHD. It will be available in about a month. It's almost ready for the printers to help women particularly, but also the people who either work or live with them to understand some of the symptoms. And that we're not lazy, crazy, or stupid. Right. Which I would love to go into your childhood about that. You talk about first grade and some of your feelings there. A couple things just for our audience to learn about what we're going to discuss today. There's a lot with this conversation because of your age, because of your experience, you unpack a lot, and some of it has to do with obviously dyslexia and ADD, which we're going to talk about, female entrepreneurship and female leadership, and being one of the first and only for a long period of time women leaders. I believe it was at IBM, right? Yes. Amongst 15,000 other colleagues, you were the first and only. So we're going to speak about a lot of this. Sure. But let's backtrack now to first grade. Yep. And what you were labeled as and what you felt. Well, the sad part is, and I was only able to express this within the last year or so, I can't do phonics. I still can't do phonics. I still, when I sit at my typewriter or laptop, writing, I still have to think about whether it's who or how. Right. Same three letters, different order. Yep. And I still have to make a conscious decision on which one is appropriate. So in first grade, I wanted to be a class monitor. And the teacher said, well, what are the initials for this person in class? And I couldn't do it. Yes. I could not do it. And without realizing it, I self-branded myself in first grade as stupid. Which, I mean, if I look back at it, how sad. And how, you hear about bullies putting labels on other people in class. But how about when you do it to yourself? Yes. What were your parents in this? Were they supportive? Were they able to help you through this? They really did not. My father would try to sit with me and help me read, the Jim and Jane and. What years are we talking about here? This was first and second grade. But what decades are we talking about? The 50s, 60s? Yeah, 50s. Right? Yeah. And so the knowledge of ADD and dyslexia wasn't out there yet to the public? Not at all. I
Right.
mean, I think dyslexia became more knowledgeable in, like the 60s
Closer
and
to the 70s.
70s. And I actually remember sitting and reading an article in Fortune. The guy who was the executive director for Citibank, who ran their distributed processing division, was quoted in an article in Fortune saying that he went out of his way to hire dyslexics because they worked much harder because they had a chip on their shoulder.
Mm.
And I'm sitting there screaming at this magazine,
Right.
going, "You blankety blank," right?
Yeah.
You didn't offer us more money, but you knew that there was something inside of us that had this chip on our shoulder that we had to work harder
Mm-hmm.
to get the same recognition or to hide our challenges.
Yeah, and at the same time, what's really sad that we learn about dyslexia and many other disabilities, disorders, all the different, right? They all go down some similar track when they're not diagnosed, or at least they don't have that chip on the shoulder. They just go the other way without any support. Is a lot suffer from alcoholism, drug abuse, and it's because we label ourselves as stupid when we're younger, and we're labeled by others as stupid.
Yeah.
For me, I was fortunate in the sense that my mother's an educator, and picked up on it very early on, was able to get me tested. And I was born in 82, so I'm a child of the 80s and early 90s. And so for me, I had the support to where while I may have felt dumb in class, where I may have felt dumb in reading and reading out loud and things like that, my mother always gave me the positive reinforcement to not let me go down that track. However, we both know somebody from our Toastmasters who is dyslexic, speaks about it very openly, but I'll let him address it in his own circumstances. But dyslexic, speaks about it openly, and dealt with alcohol abuse because of dyslexia, because of not having that support, and was able to sober up and learn about his dyslexia, accept it as a superpower, which I think we're going to speak about as well. And really, he's the one who's educated me on this, what I'm talking about right now. Mm-hmm. So without that support or without that chip on the shoulder that you had, we can go down a really bad path.
And one of the things that I include in my card decks on the struggles is our brains don't secrete enough dopamine. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's something that science in this decade and in the prior 10 or 12 years have been able to prove. Mm-hmm. And to survive, we need that. So our brains will use all of its creativity and ingenuity to satisfy that need for dopamine. Mm. Alcohol, illegal drugs, stressful behavior, risky behavior supply it also. I talk about sleep, exercise, and nutrition as the sources that will supply that are positive.
That will cure it, not cure it, but yes.
And you talk about my downhill skiing, right? I was obsessive about skiing. I used to, for a while in my corporate career, I lived on airplanes. And I would ski 25 to 30 days a year west of the Mississippi.
You're going to have to teach me your trick, because I'm an avid skier, and I bought an Epic Pass for 3 days of skiing this season, and I have yet to use one of them.
Well, you notice what I said, west of the Mississippi.
How'd you fit him in? How'd you fit in all those days?
Well, it was, if I had a meeting in San Francisco, I went out early and I spent 3 days skiing in Lake Tahoe.
There you go.
If, in those days, it was interesting because I worked for a time in eastern Pennsylvania during my corporate life, and I would send my skis home after my ski trip to go on to my meeting. And I mean, you can't do that now with all of the restrictions on baggage and, the concerns they would have it tested for bombs in today's environment. But, I'd come back in a week, and the guys at the desk would go, "Oh, Carol, your skis are in the locker over here. We've saved them for you." So I was known for that. Right.
Which is back to what you were just saying, is that dopamine of the downhill skiing. We're looking for that. I'm black diamond, double diamond skier. We're looking for that kind of thrill, really, which satisfies it. I think let's go to a little bit of the myth of dyslexia, because I think you could speak a lot to that. People think that when you're dyslexic, you just see things backwards. You read backwards. That's true, but that's not the only thing.
Well, yes, and they would assume that I was a math major in college.
Okay.
So you would say, well, how can you be dyslexic and be a math major? In getting evaluated in those courses, it was, did you understand the theory? If you made a silly mistake of reversing the numbers, that wasn't critical. Mm-hmm. You certainly don't want me doing your books as an accountant.
Right.
And that's one of the other things that I try to get across to people, that we have, I call them gifts, talents, and magic. There are certain things that we excel at. As you mentioned before, our superpower. Mm-hmm. We need to figure out what that is, and then make sure that we put ourselves in positions that highlight those superpowers. And outsource if we're running our own business, or delegate or work with a team who can cover what somebody I worked for used to call a flat side. Everybody has a flat side, something that with all the effort in the world, we wouldn't be great at. And I use this analogy in one of my books. If you have a 20% skill in something and I double it as your manager to work with you, it's still unacceptable. And that was the way we tried to manage people in the past. If you have a 70% skill level and I work with you to double that, now we're talking about serious productivity.
Right.
So that's the other thing that I help people with, is figuring out what their strengths are and then not putting yourself in positions where you know you're going to screw up.
I really like that, because it sounds, for me at least, it sounds like a new theory, quite honestly. And it's because there's a marketer out there, his name's Gary Vee, and I follow him very well. And he speaks a lot to that, of focusing on your strengths and delegating or outsourcing your weaknesses, because what's the sense in spending so much time to hone in on these weaknesses, and then you're kind of like just letting your strengths flatline, because instead of going into your strengths and really highlighting them, like you said, with that 70%, you're focused on that 20%. Well, give that 20% to somebody who's already at 70. Right. And it sounds like a new theory, but with you were always doing it.
It when you think about it, it makes immense sense. Yes. Right? And sometimes it takes a while for us to come to terms with it.
It's why I switched from I tried to force myself, before listening to Gary Vee and him talk about this, and obviously with what you're sharing here, I tried so hard to read books. I was never a good reader because of my dyslexia. It just always was very challenging for me, because I would read a page, I didn't know what I read, and I'd have to reread it, and it was so challenging, and it was exhausting to just read a chapter. And I would read a chapter, maybe two, and then I'd just give up because it was just so hard. And so I was trying one day, I was like, I really want to get really good at business. I want to get good at what I'm doing. And so I'm going to start reading more. And I tried, and I failed. And then I picked up audiobooks, because I was listening to Gary Vee, and he said, focus on your strengths. And I've always been a good listener. And going back to what you were saying, what we were talking about, sitting in the back of the classroom, for me, why I was asking you that question was, I always learned by observing. I always learned in class. I didn't learn by doing homework or by studying. I learned by listening in class and being engaged with the teacher. And so when audiobooks and YouTube came out for me, and I started watching videos and listening to the audiobooks, it was just like, wow. And now I'm like 30 books deep, and just
absolutely,
I enjoy it, and I pick up a lot from it.
I use CDs. My van has a CD reader, and I probably do 50 books a year.
Wow.
Because I drive a lot for some of the work I do. And I can't tell you the last time I listened to talk radio or sports on the radio.
Right.
I always have a CD in the car. I mean, the library knows. I mean, I will go in and check out 6 books at a time on CDs, pop them in. Some of them are business oriented. Some of them are my favorite, novelists.
Right.
But I always have something going on, and it is, I'm like you. I would fall asleep reading because it was such a struggle for me. And, it was like, it just didn't work.
And it's so funny because, you and I both give speeches, so we obviously have to write our own speeches. Right. So we write speeches. You're an author. I'm an aspiring author. Aspiring, right? Meaning like I want to, I'm working on a book right now. Actually, Matt and I were writing about it. But these are the struggles that we deal with dyslexia. I want to go to it being a superpower for you, because you do talk about that, about wanting to encourage people to understand what they have and how to use it to their benefit.
I worked for IBM started in the late 60s, where jobs for women were secretary, administration, and programmers.
Right.
When I was hired, the first thing they did was they sent us off to 10 weeks of school, whether you were a salesperson or a technical support person. And I was in the technical support because, as I say, three-piece suits in those days didn't come with skirts. So there wasn't an option when I joined IBM to be a salesperson. And I wasn't ready for it, being completely honest. But one of the things we had to do was write a simple COBOL and Fortran program. I could not do it. I mean, if my life depended on it, and my job was technical support, right? So I plagiarized my assignments from my study group. We put together study groups because there was a lot of information, and some of the people had experience in my class, and some of us were, novices right out of college. So I had to plagiarize my assignments, and if anybody had known about it, I would have probably gotten terminated.
Right.
But what I was able to do was phase zero designs, and that was talk to the businesses that we worked with, understand what their business problems and issues were, and turn that into documentation and language that a programmer or a hardware designer could make into something that could be sold.
Mm-hmm.
That was my superpower. At that time, they didn't teach organizational development in college. So it was just something that naturally came to me. I can't explain how I got it. I clearly wasn't reading about it, right, because of the dyslexia struggles. But there was just something about how my brain worked. And as you're asking me the question, I'm thinking about this. I went to a small women's college, and there were, math and physics, were offered. One of the women in my specialty in math, when she came out of the GREs, reproduced all of the questions and the multiple choice answers for the GRE exam, with the exception of one question. She couldn't remember the choices. That was the caliber of the competition for A's in, calculus and numerical analysis. And yet when and we all took probability and statistics, the people who got all the A's without breaking a sweat and all those complicated courses came out of probability and statistics looking white because they couldn't understand the subject. I got an A in that. And it was all obvious to me. So even within a certain discipline, there are certain things that just work.
Right.
And it's, if you asked me, and I came out of that exam saying, wow, that was the easiest test I've taken. And they were looking at me like, we couldn't figure out any of it. And yet this person was smart enough, to not only understand the questions that were on the graduate record exam, but to understand the tricks in the options that were offered for the multiple choice questions to be able to reproduce them.
Right.
But that's what I try to get across to people. Everybody has a superpower.
Yeah. Going back to just the statistics and productivity exams that you took there, I have some leading questions for you, and it's because some of it I'm relating to in that. For me, I'm a big avid basketball. I love basketball and follow basketball. And for me, the stats always were a big thing for me, and I could recall a lot of stats very easily. Yet math, simple math, I struggle with and are terrible at, but I understand them. And so what the leading question is when you were taking these exams, especially in the statistics and this, did it just come to you? Did the answers just come to you and you maybe couldn't even understand how they came to you, or did you know how you got to the answer?
A lot of it was obvious.
Right. So it just came to you. So if you were asked, how did you come up with this answer? You may not have been able to answer it immediately.
I probably wouldn't have been able to be a good instructor.
Right.
That's part of what I think makes a good teacher, which I wouldn't put myself in that category.
Right.
Somebody who can break it down and step by step.
Right.
I think if you're really excellent at something, and the example I'll use, my sister's a natural athlete. She doesn't have to practice. I mean, she could beat me in tennis when we both played tennis with a broomstick, right? And she was not able to explain how she does it.
Well, so the reason why it's a leading question is I'm reading Malcolm Gladwell, Blink.
Yes.
Do you know the book?
Yes.
So then you know where I'm going with this,
right.
which is that there are things like we were talking about, superpowers. There are things that just innate in us that we're able to do, like your sister and being athletic. And these statistics for you is that we don't know exactly why, and we can't really break down the reasoning, but for some reason it just makes sense. And we're able to pick out, as you said, in that multiple choice, the answer. Had we have had to have written out the answer ourselves, we may have struggled.
Right.
But being that we saw the multiple choice, we were able to say, yep, that's the answer.
Right. And in the, phase zero designs that I talked about, people would say, well, you haven't been in the industry long enough. How can you possibly be able to, work? You have to be in the industry 15 years. And not to be offensive to anybody, but my philosophy was if you understand process, right, and you change the vocabulary, I was able to move from industry to industry because I was able to take the process and my listening skills. I talk about, some of in my, resume in the old days that, I was a great listener because I really paid attention and I would hone in on what the gaps were so that, when you have the skill, it's not tied to, spending time like 15 years in an industry before you can be viewed as an expert.
Right.
And that's revolutionary and offensive to a lot of people.
Well, but it goes back to, again, that whole taking risks and chance. Again, I just feel like we're kind of like on the same wavelength here. It's relating it back to my story, starting my insurance company. I get people that ask me, they go, well, how long have you been in the industry for? Or, have you ever owned, and things like that. And I go, I only started in the industry in 2017, and yet today I'm an agency owner. And to your point, so many agency owners typically are either inherit an agency, they've been working at their parents' agency for 20, 30 years, right, or they've been in the industry for 20 or 30 years and are finally taking the leap to own an agency. For me, I always knew I wanted to own a business. And I got into the insurance industry, and as a couple years in, I said, this is it. I know exactly how to do it and what I want to do. But it's back to what you were saying. It's taking that risk because, sure, I could probably use another 5 years under my belt and learn more, and I'm sure I will. But that's not exciting to me. It's exciting to me is starting now.
And that's interesting because I think I was at IBM for 2.5 years, and I ran a team of 6 people working for one of the major Wall Street brokerage firms,
right,
trying to figure out how to put process into the paperwork, the back office cage that handles all of the stock transactions. I didn't go home every night pulling my hair out going, what do we do tomorrow?
Right.
It just came.
It just came to you, yeah.
And it was like...
And you worked with some really big companies, some I would like to name because I think so many people are consultants and they work with companies, and that's really cool and all. But you worked with Sears back when Sears was the Amazon of its time.
Absolutely.
People of our generation, of my generation, don't necessarily understand what Sears was in the 70s, 80s, 90s. Yeah. It teetered out in the 90s.
Sears had 860 stores in the U.S. and Canada, and I was responsible for finding a product that would replace the cash registers in all of those stores. Now, if I stopped long enough to think about it, Black Friday with the wheels coming off the technology in the Sears stores would not have been what we wanted to see on the front page of the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, right?
Right.
Sears could not do business on Black Friday. It would have been horrific.
Right.
So that was a very high exposure, very high pressure project. But that triggers the dopamine. I
Right.
loved it. Okay.
Yes.
I mean,
And just to go back to Sears for a second, Sears at the time was was your Amazon, right? You could buy tires there, you could buy clothes there, you can buy
it was.
knickknacks.
That's a good analogy.
Right.
It was the complete retail establishment.
And I'll add one more piece to it, being that I'm in the insurance world. It's where Allstate started out.
That's
Allstate
right.
started their booth in a Sears location.
Yep.
And
Yep.
it was because of Allstate tires.
Yep.
So they're a little,
No, it was
little history lesson for everybody out there.
Complete, anything you wanted.
Right. And then you also work for Travelers, which is an insurance company, right? Is that the right Travelers?
Yes.
Yeah. And then Coors. I'm not familiar with.
We did, one of my last projects was IBM here in Poughkeepsie made water-cooled large computers
Okay.
that would take, the entire floors of large office buildings. And there was a migration to what people now have on their cell phone,
Wow.
right? And if if you're still using a tower in your office with a screen attached to it, that was the beginning of client-server computing. And IBM was trying to figure out why these large clients were doing this stupid thing in IBM jargon. Why are they going off? And the view of some of the executives was it's inefficient because they sit there idle for most of the day, right? I mean, how often you're not on your cell phone or laptop all the time. It is unreliable because Bill Gates didn't spend a lot of time testing software. If anybody still remembers the blue screen phenomenon when that first came out.
And we're talking about the decade of the 80s now, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. This was the late 80s, yeah. And so they put together a team of 16 people. And I was the client contact for that effort. And I ran a 3-day presentation for 80 combination of IBM's top clients and their sales team and some IBM executives, a 3-day event after interviewing a lot of these large clients to figure out why were they doing this thing. And I'm an entrepreneur. Okay, I started my first business at 16. I taught piano lessons because of my dyslexia. My dad didn't think it was worth me going to college. That, I was better off going to a commercial high school, which I poo-pooed that, with the support of my mother. But I was determined that somehow or other, despite, self-branding myself as stupid in first grade, I still knew that there was something in here
Right.
that needed,
Thank
some
goodness.
expression, right? So I started teaching little kids how to play the piano when I was a junior in high school, and I did that for 6 years through graduating from college, and I paid for all of my college tuition. But I am an entrepreneur at heart, and regardless of all of the structures that the corporate world tried to impose on me, when I talk to these businesses, I'm sitting there going, okay, if I ran this department and I had an idea, or one of my team came to me with an idea, and I could, for $10,000, buy one of these tower computers and get 3 of my top people to work on it and come up with a new product that could capture the market. And that's what these clients that I was talking with were saying. Not exclusively in those words, but that was the message that came across to me. The application development cycle in the IT field was 3 years. As an entrepreneur, I'm not getting at the back of that line.
Right.
And that was the message I carried forward, because I'm a visionary.
Right.
And I carried that message forward with no support. I was about to say not a lot of support. I will be candid. No support, because IBM saw its water-cooled engine product line cratering, which it did seriously for a while. But that was a pure entrepreneurial drive. I've got a concept. I proved it worked. If it didn't work, I wouldn't get a ding in my helmet, because for $10,000 I could bury it in my budget. But if I captured the market, I'm a hero.
Right.
I'll sign up for that any day of the week. Times 6.
There's so much to learn from that too, from what you just shared there. There's on the IBM side, which doesn't have to be IBM, it could be any large corporation, the giants. It's so hard for them to change their mindset, to change their point of view, and to then, as you just said, they have this water-cooled product. They have this strong product, really, let's just call it that they've invested a ton of money in. And so there's this giant, and they're going, we don't want to change. We don't want to adapt. We've invested so much.
It's their cash cow.
So they lose that flexibility. And then on the other side of the other side of learning here is that entrepreneur. Because again, this podcast is for these business leaders and for these entrepreneurs to learn from your experience here. And you put your entrepreneur hat on, and you put yourself in the shoes of the client, which if anybody out there is listening, if you're selling a product, if you're trying to educate somebody on a product, or if you're an entrepreneur and trying to find a gap in the market, put yourself on the other side. Put yourself in the client's shoes. What do they want? And that's what you did, because then you're able to speak their language, understand their needs, understand what they want. Like you said, I'm not going to put myself 3 years behind online. Right. I want to be ahead of the curve.
Right.
And then because we're small, and as entrepreneurs and as business leaders in a developing market, because we're small, we're flexible. We're able to, as you said, bury it in, bury the 10 grand. We're able to make adjustments. And so I think when we're for our listeners out there, you have a great opportunity right now, right? You have a great opportunity to take risks, to be able to take advantage of these different opportunities where, there are Amazons out there. There are huge companies that you're going to compete against, but just remember, they're not as flexible as you, and they're not putting themselves in the same shoes as you did yourself too, Carol, right?
Yeah. So that's why, I didn't work with Travelers being on their team or Coors, but I interviewed them to get their requirements and then put that into a document that was presented to try to rattle some cages.
Yeah, which is really, really important.
But that's a great point for anybody who's looking around at doing something new in business. There are always opportunities.
Always, yeah.
There's always something that you can do that's unique, that's a little more creative, that will catch people's attention.
And there are different niches. And, again, sticking to, the Sears or the Amazon of today, Amazon didn't start off as the end all be all for all your products, no. and it won't end that way either. It started off as just selling books online, So find your niche, find what you're really good at, learn what the market wants, and go after it, and then develop from there and grow from there and all that.
The important thing is to build the infrastructure that will allow you to stand out in the first product that you offer, and then people will come to you and say, well, if you did that, couldn't you do just a little different? And if there are enough of those people asking for that same little different, now you've got a growing company. Yeah,
I remember seeing, I forget where it was, but it was talking about how to grow as a company and be successful as a company. And it said, be the first, right? So if you could be the first, then great. You're golden, right? A little bit difficult to be the first right now, although there's plenty of things. I just don't know what they are yet, right? Mm-hmm. But maybe somebody who's listening knows what it is. So be the first. But if you're not the first, be better than the first. I believe Hertz rental car was, or it might still be, is like the top rental car company of its time.
Yes.
And that's why Avis's slogan is,
we try harder.
We try harder. And that's the reason for that slogan, is not because of anything, but Avis is second to Hertz.
Right.
And so they try harder.
And they try harder. And, there are a lot of examples of that. I mean, JetBlue, who was started by David Needleman, who is also very ADHD and speaks about it openly. And they were the first airline to offer one-way cheap tickets. And now that has blossomed into the Southwest. Virgin has versions of that type of travel. And it takes somebody to say, let me try it a little different.
That's right.
Let me not go head to head with the big guys, but just offer something where there's a gap.
And finding that gap. You found that gap in a lot of your you were a manager, so a lot of your employees, a lot of the people, and then obviously you highlighted that gap. And you mentioned, and I kind of want to quote this because I thought you wrote this so nicely, and you're such a great writer. You said, leadership is about modeling the behavior you want to instill in the people you come in contact with. And I would love for you to just share a little bit more about your leadership story and your management story. We touched upon it early on, that at a campus of 15,000 people, and you were the first, and for a long time.
I was the highest ranking woman on the Poughkeepsie plant site when there were 15,000 employees.
For a very long time. Yeah.
And
so share a
actually,
little bit about
only for a year.
Only for a year?
Yeah.
Share a little bit of that journey for us.
Well, as I said, I started as in the technical support field, which allowed me to do the project design work, that I avoided the nemesis of the very detailed technical support. And actually, I thought about this because I'm writing something else now, and I couldn't remember how the guy I worked for recognized that I was clearly not able to do systems programming work, because he assigned me to an account where the prior person in my role was actually behaving as a systems programmer for the customer, and they were not willing to pay an IBM employee to be a virtual employee of the business. And he said, I know that they will never ask you to do that type of work. And then I realized that the growth in IBM was out of the sales side of the operation. Mm-hmm. And, I raised my hand. I said, because I worked with somebody who I thought, if he can be a sales rep, it can't be that hard. Right. I mean, I won't go any further on that.
Well,
that discussion,
you don't have to go any further on a negative side, but I say it all the time with sales. People say, well, I don't sell. I'm not a salesperson. And I say anybody could be a salesperson. There's different types of salespeople. There are very technical salespeople who will only speak about technicalities and will be very definition driven. Will only speak about exactly what the product does and how it works and how it operates. But because of that technical skill that they have, their follow-up is technical. They have a procedure of following up. And that's why they're successful, because they know, I'm going to call you at 2 o'clock every Monday for the next 3 weeks. And you tell me to call you at 4 o'clock on Wednesdays, then I'm going to call you at 4 o'clock on Wednesdays. And because they follow that path, they're successful. Yeah. You have other salespeople who are not technical. That's myself. I'm not technical in any way. My follow-up is not as great, but we're more relationship driven. We're more of, I'm going to build a relationship with you, some great rapport, to where when I do call you, you want to pick up the phone because what's Michael got to say today? Yeah. It's going to be fun. Exactly. Yeah. So I always think that there's always an opportunity for someone to be a salesperson. It just depends on what kind of salesperson they want to be. Mm-hmm. And the other myth I want to dispel about salespeople is that they don't always have to be pushy or aggressive. If you understand a sales cycle, it doesn't have to be a month.
No, this guy was just not good.
No, he was not good. And that's fair. But for our listeners,
I understand.
It doesn't always have to be the day of. It could be a year later. It doesn't matter what you sell. You have quotas, so then get more people in your pipeline. That's my solution.
Right, exactly.
But go ahead.
Well, so I raised my hand and I volunteered for a very difficult client. And they said, okay, we'll give you a shot. So they sent me off to sales school. It was actually, it goes back to skiing. In 1974, I was scheduled to go to sales school the last week in April. And all of April, there was tremendous snow, so there's hope for your pass in April.
Oh, thank you.
and I was skiing with someone who was on a 4-day work week. So we went up Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And there was nobody there on Friday because everybody else was working, and I always had more accumulated vacation that I could use. And the last week before sales school, I said, I can't go because I don't want to have to call my boss from Montpelier Hospital and say I'm in traction.
Right.
And his comment to me was, I don't expect you to be top of your class, but I do expect you to be an officer. Because he said, you've got 7 years in the business, so your leadership skills should come across.
Right.
And so, I went up there with a sweatshirt that said tennis lady because I was playing tennis at the time. And every time, class broke and we got into our casual clothes to go to dinner and do our homework, I had my tennis lady shirt on. And I got elected vice president of the class.
Of the class.
Okay. And, and I remember one of the comments I made. There was a guy who was incredibly social. And so I was speaking right after him, and I said, well, I can't be like so-and-so, and said, who is unaccustomed to public speaking. And the whole class just roared because this guy was, always social. For the first week, got elected president, and then disappeared because he cracked the books so that he could, focus on learning the material. So, and one of the cards in my card deck is leadership is a choice, not a position or a title.
Mm.
And you can be a leader in everything you do.
Yes.
And on the back side of the card where I provide more information, it says, the statement is, your actions are so loud, I can't hear what you're saying.
Mm.
Which is great advice for parents, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do what I say, not what I do. No, that's not going to work.
Right.
But, one day, I was a successful sales rep for 5 years,
mm-hmm.
and then went off to a manager position, and I was in an office in Pennsylvania, and one day everybody, we wear blue suits. Okay, I mean, that was, everybody in IBM was known for our blue suits. Good reason for that. We were telling guys twice our age how to run their business.
Mm.
And we needed to look like them.
Mm.
And that's what they looked like in those days. But in the summer, I was a little more casual. So I would come in, with a blazer, but with a colorful skirt. One day I looked at my office, and every woman on the floor had a blazer and a colorful skirt. And I thought to myself, oh my God, I'm not sure I'm prepared for this much leadership.
Right. What have I done?
But that's how it permeates.
Yes.
So if you want certain type of behavior, you need to mirror it. You need to mimic it.
Did you, at that time, obviously dress code was highly enforced, not just for women, but for men as well.
Absolutely.
And so
lace shoes.
Go ahead.
Guys had to wear lace shoes, no loafers. Because I dated somebody who left IBM because he wanted to wear loafers. I mean, this was, he was years ago.
Right.
But yeah, very specific because of the people we were in contact with.
Right.
If we look sloppy or, like one of the clerks in a business and we're walking into a vice president or president's office, how much credibility would we bring with us?
Right.
Zero. And that was why. So, in today's environment, you need to look like your clients.
Yeah, which has changed.
Absolutely. I mean, now if you wear a tie, you stand out.
Right.
It's more of an open collared, with probably a jacket. Or
it depends.
In the summertime,
right.
No.
Right.
It's the culture of the community you're working with or aspire to work with.
So did you have to ask those young ladies to change their skirts?
No.
No. Good.
I never addressed it. I was just like, oh God. But it reinforced the importance of what is the behavior that you want to project. I was the newest professional manager in the office. And in 1981, IBM hired for the first time. So we had 7 or 8 new hires. So I ran the new hire program for when they were in the office. It wasn't 10 weeks of continuous education. It was a year-long program of a couple of weeks in school, come back to the office, and, and shadow some of the people. But I ran a training meeting.
Are you familiar with the name Shelley Archambault?
No.
You're not? Okay.
No.
I understand. So I read her book. It's unapologetically I knew I should have left it up on my screen. Unapologetically apologetic or something like that.
I'm not familiar with it.
She was a VP at IBM for a long period of time, I believe in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And just speaking about being one of the only women in the room as well. And she went off to Japan and was one of the international
that's a tough assignment.
vice presidents, right? So I just wasn't familiar if you knew her name.
No.
Great book, by the way.
I'll have to look it up.
Yes, I will send it to you. But the other question I have for you has to do with you putting your hand up, because we go back to your first grade classroom where you didn't.
Well, I did. I tried to volunteer, but I didn't have the skill.
In first grade?
Right.
You didn't have the skill.
Because I wanted to be a monitor. If I hadn't thought about that aspect of it, but I volunteered.
You did.
Not knowing that I didn't have the skill, but I still had the chutzpah or guts or drive.
And so this time you volunteered.
Yeah.
And you felt that you had the skill.
Yeah, I knew I could do as good a job.
And that was the difference.
And that was the difference. And, one of the things that I am proud of is that I address the issues, and I've actually fired 2 people in my career.
I want to talk about the firing of the 2 people in a second, because that has to do with some of the challenges that you had to overcome. And we speak a lot about challenges, but one of them that I'm trying to address here with the raising of your hand has to do with being the only female in the room a lot of the time and in the corporate world. And what I'm remembering is a study that was done about men versus women when they're applying for a job.
Yes.
And that men, and myself included, because I know I've done it 100 times, will apply for a job if they only fit maybe 30% of the role. I'm getting the statistic wrong, but let's just call it that, right?
You're absolutely right.
I'm absolutely right?
You're right.
And because we have the mindset, or at least genetically, we're genetically, geared or conditioned to have the mindset that we'll figure it out. Right. And the other person, the hiring manager or whoever they are like, well, yeah, he'll figure it out. Whereas women are also genetically conditioned or geared to, they have to have like 90% of that application.
At least 70%.
At least 70% filled out.
I know, I'm familiar with that.
Please speak on that, because that goes back to why I'm bringing up the whole raising of your hand, is that I raised my hand and volunteered for things I had no experience with, but I got picked and I went in and I said, I'll figure it out.
Exactly.
And that's always been my mindset.
It is a true weakness of women which
has been conditioned.
The jury's a little out on that, where that comes from, at least from the material I've ever read. Women are perfectionists, which is why we do very well in grammar school and high school.
Mm.
And we will spend inordinate amount of time. We're people pleasers. There's a gender role expectation that we, take care of people, that we're not confrontational, that we're supportive, that we put ourselves last. And, where does that come from? It's certainly not self-serving, because and I'm a huge advocate of equal pay for women, because we outlive the men that we live with, right? So we have to have income. If we don't have a relationship that provides financial support, we're supporting ourselves. Very many women are head of household with children that don't get support from the fathers, and we suffer. I mean, there are the biggest part of the poverty population in the United States, which is far advanced from most other countries, are women. And that's because they don't put themselves in positions where they will drive the salary and the prestige and the income, and they're bashful about it. And, I never thought of my raising my hand in first grade to be a class monitor as the start of my leadership. It never occurred to me, but I do know that I have done that. And I have wiggled, in some cases, my way into positions to take leadership roles. I know that I am good at it.
Mm-hmm. That's self-confidence.
And it's self-confidence. I can't tell you exactly where it came from, because my brother and sister are brilliant. Okay, I couldn't come close to what they've achieved, and my brother has passed. But and yet, I know what I'm good at, and I put myself in a position to be good at as many things as I can get myself into, where my skills are recognized, not always appreciated, but I know that they're strong enough to make a positive impact. And that's the word that I use, impact. I'm all about making impact.
I find you very impactful. So if you were to just kind of take all of that and just give your advice to, I think that what you're talking about is not only for females, but also for any minority out there with what you're speaking to. How could you maybe package that into a sentence or two of advice for them on raising their hand?
There are opportunities in this country, more than, places where other people come from. And you Andy Grove, who started Intel, was a Hungarian immigrant. Einstein, was on the last ship from Europe before the Nazis came across. And that's one of the negative things about limiting immigration that we're experiencing right now. That
we don't know who might be the next.
We don't know who we're missing out on.
Right.
And having a different view. We talked about how do you start a business? Well, you have a different view. Mm-hmm. You can relate to a different population. So there are opportunities. I grew up in a very poor household. Wiggled my way in, positioned myself to be, a leader. And it's interesting because the college I went to, each class put on a show every year to get people from different majors together, and not just be in the funnels of if you're an English major or a history major or a science major, but just to get people to mingle. And I was the accompanist for my class for 4 years, so that I was known throughout the class. So find something
right
that you enjoy, that you're good at, and just take the time to really appreciate what that skill is.
That's great. And I also like the fact that you say that there is plenty of opportunity, and sometimes it feels like there isn't. And sometimes that's when you have to carve out your own opportunity and create your own, like with Andy Grove and Intel. There wasn't Intel before Andy Grove. He found it.
Absolutely was not. And it's like why I am, people say, well, aren't you retiring? I don't think I have the retirement gene.
Right.
But that's why I'm starting, I'm putting out this card deck for people with ADD and ADHD, both for the people who suffer with it and the people who live with them, just to give an understanding of it, to share my knowledge.
Yeah. And I think you could relate that ADD and ADHD to all of the different struggles that are out there. You don't have to be diagnosed with that or dyslexia or be a woman or be a minority in any way. It's just any struggle you can relate to some of the cards in your deck there that you speak about, like you just said about leadership, is that relates to anybody who's looking for a leadership position or who, as you said, can be anybody. Right. It doesn't take any leadership position. We were just going into some of the challenges that you dealt with, and in your entire career, you only fired 2 people, and that's really significant.
Well, it was very unique because the culture at IBM was to just move them on to some unsuspecting other manager. And particularly when I was in quota positions, I had a quota.
Yes.
I had a team.
Right.
I divided it appropriately among the team, but if somebody dropped out and wasn't carrying their load, I basically had to share that with the other members, which meant I was reducing their salary, their income.
Of the top performers.
Right. And in fairness to the top performers, I didn't feel that penalizing them was appropriate. Mm. So that's how I was very comfortable about it when somebody was not performing. It was not easy. Mm-hmm. Nobody signs up to be a manager to do that.
Right.
But in fairness to the people who are producing and to motivate them to say, I'm getting recognized for the contribution I'm making, and I will continue striving, that was my responsibility to make the hard call.
It's having that stronger yes, of that stronger, that's Stephen Covey talks about that, about having the stronger yes to be able to support what you say no to, or in your position there, you have those strong, hardworking top performers, and you have to let the other person go, because while you don't want to let them go, you have this stronger yes, you have the stronger group that you have to support, because if you don't show them that support, they're going to start going down the wrong path as well.
Because then I'm showing a leadership role that does not support what I'm saying.
Yeah. Leadership isn't easy.
No, it's not. But it is fun.
It's a lot of fun, yes.
When you have the pleasure of working with top people, it is very enjoyable.
And you worked with a lot. Part of what you do in terms of giving back is you've published several books that speak to so many things that we've just discussed today in the podcast, but you also give back a percentage of your gross sales to different charities.
Yes. Would
you like to speak a little bit about that?
I do. On my the goal-setting book, which is getting retitled, I'm going to reissue it. It's going to be called Buy Back Time. And I contribute 10% of the gross sales to an organization that's run by Lawrence O'Donnell and the Kind Fund, something that's a UNICEF program in Malawi. High school is not free for girls, and so, with my struggles with getting recognized for the need for education, when I heard about the fact that they provide scholarships for uniforms and books, I contribute to the Kind is Kids in Need of desks, but they have a second organization that is called, that supports the high school for girls. So I make 10% contributions from my books to that education program, because you don't have to be in the wilds of Africa to struggle with getting an education. But when I put the first version of the book out, that was what struck my heart, I guess is the way to say it.
I like that you said that struck your heart. I think you want to give to so many different charities. We all want to be able to give, and everybody's out there looking for a donation and looking for help. And while you want to give to all of them, I think it's important for everyone who's listening and who's starting a company or who works within a company is to work with an organization that, as you said, struck your heart. I really like that, because everybody has a different need and everybody has a different charity that speaks to them. And so stick with that charity and help them. And obviously that one makes perfect sense with everything we just spoke about.
Yes, it does.
It aligns really well with you.
And then I do one for another book on ADD, Leverage Your ADD Advantages, and Sparrow's Nest, which is a local charity here in Poughkeepsie area. And it was started by a woman whose neighbor had breast cancer with three small children. So she started making meals for her neighbor so that, she could attend to all her treatments and not have to worry about, feeding the kids. And so that's the charity. I had a breast cancer scare at that time. Again, something personal that I was able to connect with.
Right.
Turned out to be a false alarm. But for the 6 weeks between I got the potential diagnosis and had the exploratory surgery, I was a basket case. And I was sitting there going, I can't imagine having to take care of kids in the state that I'm in right now.
Right.
So that's the other one that I support.
Interesting so during that time, that 6 week span is when you found Sparrow's Nest, or when you started working with them?
I knew about them.
Right.
But never connected with them. But that personal connection of, oh my God.
Right. Because there's the reason why I asked that is because there's a huge stress reducer in giving. And I just watched a TED Talk on it about stress and viewing stress differently. And when you understand why you have stress and viewing it differently, and then just speaking about giving, and when you're giving, and we talk about this in public speaking too, of like when you're giving to your audience, it reduces the stress. And so I wonder if there's any correlation to your diagnosis and this
It was
search for.
I had learned about Sparrow's Nest before, but never had any connection with it. Like
Right.
you said, there are a lot of charities, and how do you pick
which one, right? And that's how it connected.
And that's how I connected. And it turned out I was at a networking event where the founder was speaking, and I didn't realize that was the topic. I happened to be sitting next to the CFO, and just whispered in his ear and said, "How do I contribute here?" So,
right.
Just circumstances.
Yes. But it does help. And then also you're a part of MAD.
Yes.
Mothers Against Drunk Driving.
That book hasn't been written yet, but my brother was killed by a drunk driver. So when that book comes out, that's where that will go.
Well, don't wait too long on that book.
Right.
I'm sure it'll make a huge impact.
Yeah.
This has been wonderful. You have a lot more to share, and we can go on for hours. But as we conclude with this, you just talk about your gifts and finding them as an instinct. And if you could conclude our show with some of your insights here.
Oh, wow.
And what I meant to say is finding them as instinctually.
Yeah. Well, let me say that if you want to learn more, I am starting a new Instagram page, which is ADD Businesswoman, and you can connect with me there. It's hard to know, since I am instinctive with, what is the next challenge. The things that I have on my plate right now are keeping me fully engaged, if I could say that. I want to be speaking in larger venues. And so I thank you, Michael, for this opportunity, but just to get the message out, because it is still in this era of 2022 that people still don't accept it as a broad challenge, and accept the values that we contribute. How many people are sitting there saying, "I can't afford to go to school. I can't do this. I can't do that. There aren't jobs." And I'm trying to get people, as you point out, my cards speak to the opportunities. How can you position yourself in a way that shows your strengths? And that's where I'm here to help people.
Which is huge, because I would say, while I can't speak as a minority, I can't speak on the challenges that a minority might face in searching for a job or searching for opportunity. But I would say that based off of what I can see in terms of the landscape of social media, of the internet, of the different the different jobs that are available in terms of oh my goodness, what is it called? All of these the gig economy that we have here. I would say that there's a huge opportunity now to find what you're really good at, what we talked about earlier, your niche. What are you really, really good at? Get really good at it. Pick up a gig here and there doing it, and then just expand on it. There is, I believe CNBC does these little specials on these young millionaires, these 20-year-old millionaires, and how they become it. And some of them, it's because they work 2 jobs and they save a ton of money. And I remember there was one on a woman who's a copywriter for one of the gig websites, which is called Fiverr. Mm-hmm. And on Fiverr.com, you can go there, you can hire a designer, a graphic designer for $5 a design, and all sorts of different things. Yep. And so she's a copywriter, and she's earning close to $1 million a year. And when they interviewed her, and I watched her interview, it's a very short interview, by the way, you can look it up on YouTube. It's I think about 10 minutes. She just spoke about she would pick up a few copywriting jobs here and there, $5, $10, $20, and eventually they started increasing her price and asking for more to the point where I think she started outsourcing it herself.
Absolutely.
And able to build an income to where she's making close to $1 million.
That's
incredible.
That is, Fiverr is one of them. There are organizations for virtual assistants. There are organizations that train people how to be virtual assistants. Somebody who will start as a virtual assistant, and if you're really good, let me tell you, every small business owner in the world needs a virtual assistant to take the stuff off their plate.
Yes.
That they're never going to get good at, that 20% that we spoke about earlier. If you have those kinds of skills, start doing it. if you're good, people are going to, first of all, gobble up as much of your time as they can afford, and then refer you to all their friends and associates, and you will be busier than you can handle, so that you may be in a position that you're going to be outsourcing.
Right.
But that's the kind of place, and Fiverr is a perfect example of start small, be good.
Yeah.
And be responsive. If you commit to getting something done by next Friday, get it done by next Friday. And just that small step will get you recognized.
And I would add to that consistency, is that it's about the consistency too, because you can be really good, you can get it out by Friday, but if you don't do it again, then you stop there.
Sure.
So it's about doing it again. And also, I think the other myth to dispel here is, maybe it's not a myth, it might be real, right? The kids coming out of college with this huge debt. I came out of college with debt. Many people come out of college with debt. It's not a new phenomena. Right. What's new is that they don't want to take on a job that doesn't pay much.
Right.
I remember I came out of college, and my first job offer that I was thrilled to get was $30,000 a year. It was $30,000 a year plus commission, and it was an upside to it, obviously. But it was $30,000. I was like, yeah, I'll take it, right?
Absolutely.
Whereas I speak with people, I'm hiring, and I speak with, how much am I going to earn? Well, what are you're going to take a year off and not earn anything? Earn something, learn a skill, get really good at it, and use it somewhere else.
Right. I know. I worked for IBM for 25 years. That is probably never going to happen again in the new economy. The difference there was I could change jobs and stay under the same corporate umbrella. But it's very common now for people to change jobs.
Yes.
But get experience. That's one of the ways you learn how, to uncover your gifts and your talents. It may be something that you never knew existed that you want to follow up on. I mean, like if you had asked me when I started working for IBM if I would do phase zero designs.
Right. What is that?
I don't know if I have to say something, because my facial expression is like, I wouldn't have known where to find one.
Right. When
I started. But things will appear.
Yes.
If you're paying attention and if you're responsive and responsible.
Yep.
And you have to start. I agree with you. I mean, we're wondering where all these people who are just quitting. Millions of people are quitting. Where's the next meal coming from? You're gonna lose your skill level, because technology. One of the challenges and one of the reasons I left the IT field when I did was that I wasn't willing to keep up with the pace of technology in that particular field. So if you're away for 6 months, the world has changed. So you have to engage.
Yeah. Yes.
That's really critical.
Yes. I really do think that there's a tremendous opportunity out there, and just look at everything through the lens of opportunity, whether it's you're a cashier at a retail store and you're standing there at a 9 to 5 going, why am I doing this? I graduated college with a communications degree of some sort or whatever it is. And by the way, that's me. I was behind a counter too. But you learn interaction with people. You learn how to take an order. You learn how to stock a shelf. You learn that there's a process there. You learn to work with a manager. You learn how to go into management. So you just got to look at everything with opportunity. Yeah. Speaking of that, there's a great book called Good to Great, which is a really good book by Jim Collins. Yep. And this is a mantra that you live by. And I really like this mantra, which is get the right people on the bus and put them in the right seats.
Yes. Again, if you're starting a business, hire the best possible people you can afford, because there's no leverage in a solo operation.
That's right.
And you need to think about that. But then making sure that they're doing the things that highlight their skills. And that's why, when I read Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, I picked up on that immediately, because one of the things that I do for businesses is I do assessments on potential staff or existing staff to help you understand if there are pitfalls pending because the person doesn't really have the skills that are reflected in their resumes, or whether you have people who have skills and they're being undervalued and they may be looking for other roles. And if you're not willing to promote them or reposition them, you may lose them to somebody else when you had the gem in your own organization. I mean, there's a classic story. This goes back to the mid-'90s when everybody was going public, and there was a real need for printers for the S4s that had to be presented to the SEC if you were petitioning to go public. And this printing company in the financial area was, for 6 months, trying to find an additional salesperson. Finally, this wasn't my account, one of my colleagues convinced the owner to do an assessment on the customer service people. And there was a woman who stood out as a match for the job that they were trying to fill, and they moved her out of customer service into sales. And in 6 months, she outsold all of the sales guys. And so the owner said, I want to see everybody in the organization to see if there are some people who are being sheltered by managers who want to keep their staff in place so that the manager's job is easier versus the benefit of the organization. And the analogy here is, if any of you are classical music fans and you all of a sudden notice there are a large number of female performers in classical orchestras, how did that happen so rapidly? Blind interviews.
Wow.
Behind a screen, women take off their high heels so you can't tell by footwear who is performing. All of a sudden, the musical world has discovered that there are 10, 15, 20% of orchestras that now have female members, which 15, 20 years ago was unheard of, because all of the men were, going back to Michael's comments, were perpetuating the theory that only men were good enough musicians to be in classical orchestras.
Yeah.
So I'm a huge advocate of blind interviews in all operations.
That's interesting, which actually can be done today, because so many happen over Zoom now that all you got to do is turn your camera off. Although I don't like it. I like it when they have their camera on.
Yes.
But yeah, I understand in the idea of interviewing blindly, that would make sense. Obviously, you're going to tell something from the voice, but
right. Well, yeah. But if you're doing an assessment, which
Sure.
is one of the
Right.
services I offer, the information can be done in
Blindly.
a way that you get a numeric score, and then you rank the interview candidates by their score fit against the position as you've defined it, or if you have people in place who are top performers, you have them complete the assessment. And so now you've got a very analytical criteria to schedule the interviews, and you may fill the positions if you've got 10 applicants, and you may fill the available position by interviewing the first 3, and it saves you a lot of time.
You know what's so cool about what you're talking about, and what we're just kind of like, this is a little bit off track now, but this is our ADD coming out. I'm looking at because I always print out the intake form just to take notes and make sure we stay on track, and I hit the highlights for you. But just looking at your intake form, and I'm wondering if I were to print this out and remove all of the women stuff in here in terms of like first woman and woman, I wonder if I gave it to 10 people that I know personally, if they could figure out if this is a man or a woman who fulfilled these roles here that you have.
Probably not.
Yeah. I'm just wondering that, like, when I do an intake form, like, it'd be kind of neat if I didn't know who my guest is going to be, and I read this, working with all these companies and everything, like, what's my perception, right? Like, do I just think that this is, okay, who's this guy going to be, coming in from IBM, working? And then in walks Carol. Interesting. Anyway, I guess a little bit off the rails, but yeah, no, I think, well, actually, it's along the lines of what you were just sharing there, but yeah, very, very insightful podcast today. I really took a lot from it, and I am so happy to have finally gotten you in here. You and I, we've talked, we've shared the stage together in speech contests, which is really exciting. By the way, I'm going to be in the speech contest next Tuesday for
great.
Toastmasters.
Great, yeah.
So it's been really nice having you in today and learning your story.
It's been a pleasure, and you've forced me or encouraged me to think about things that I will now include in some of my writing. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, you have so much to share. What I've learned, just going back for a second here to the whole opportunity and everything. When I first started this podcast, I started this with the idea I'm going to only interview CEOs of major companies that can share their story, rose in the ranks, or were developers in the sense of like entrepreneurs, of like they founders, excuse me, is what I'm trying to look for, right? So they were CEOs who rose in the ranks of business world, or founders. And I'm only going to interview these people, and they're going to have multiple people underneath them. And what I've learned from meeting so many different people, which are CEOs, I've had them on the show, and founders, which I've had on the show, and then going to the solopreneurs, or when you said, "Hey, Michael, I want to share my story with you," and I said, "Well, what's Carol doing these days?" And then just looking at it from a different perspective of opportunity, of going, Carol comes from this history, this long line that I knew about you, of the IBM and everything, and thinking about it with my other guests that I've had on as solopreneurs of, well, wait a second, they might be in the beginning of their journey. So it's so nice to have you on and hear your whole story. And I'm so happy that I switched my mindset for our show here to be able to have guests like you on.
Great. Well, thank you. Appreciate the time.
Yes.
And I hope it can be helpful to people.
It certainly is. Can you just share where people can contact you?
My Instagram account is ADD Businesswoman.
Awesome. Carol, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you for listening to The Michael Esposito Show. For show notes, video clips, and more episodes, go to michaelespositoinc.com/podcast.